Hello, and thank you for coming back. If this is your first time here, welcome. I'm glad you're here. Tonight, I want to tell you about chimpanzees, an animal that shares more of its biology with you than almost any other creature on Earth. Pound for pound, it's also considered one of the strongest animals alive. A chimpanzee's punch, by some estimates, hits several times harder than a trained human boxer's. You don't need to remember any of it. Just get comfortable, and when you're ready, we'll begin. If you've ever watched footage of chimpanzees, you've probably seen this. Two of them sitting close together in the shade. One runs its fingers slowly through the other's fur. Again and again. Not fast, not urgent, like it has nowhere else to be. They can sit like that for an hour, sometimes longer. It isn't really about cleaning. There's very little dirt to remove most of the time. It's something else, something that goes back a very long way, long before there were chimpanzees at all, long before there was anyone to watch them and wonder why. To understand it, we have to go back, further than you might expect. About 7 million years ago, in the forests of Central Africa, there lived a creature that was not a chimpanzee. It was not a human either. It was something else, something that would later split into two very different paths. We don't know exactly what it looked like. The fossil record from that time is thin, scattered across a few sites in what is now Chad and Kenya. But we know it walked on all fours most of the time, steadying itself on its knuckles the way chimpanzees still do today. We know it ate fruit, leaves, insects, whatever the forest offered that season. At some point, a divide happened, not on a single day, not because of one event we can point to. Slowly, over hundreds of thousands of years, groups of this ancestor drifted apart. Some stayed close to the dense forest. Others began spending more time at the forest's edge, where the land opened up and dried out. The ones that stayed in the forest kept walking on their knuckles. They kept climbing. They kept living mostly among the trees, moving branch to branch, sleeping above the ground where the leopards could not easily reach them. The ones that moved toward open land began standing upright more and more, generation after generation. Their hips changed shape, their spines changed shape, their feet slowly stopped being built for grasping branches and started being built for walking long distances across flat ground. One of those paths became us, the other became chimpanzees. It's a strange thing to think about. Somewhere in Africa, 7 million years ago, there was one shared ancestor, and everything that followed, every human city, every chimpanzee troop resting in the shade right now, grew out of that single starting point. The forests kept changing after that. Africa's climate across millions of years moved through long stretches of drying and cooling, then wetting and warming again. Each shift reshaped the land. Grassland gave way to forest in some places. Grassland gave way back to forest in others. The ancestors of chimpanzees adapted to a life that moved between the two. Thick forest canopy where fruit grew high and food could be unpredictable. Open patches where the ground offered other things to eat, roots, insects, the occasional small animal.
Their bodies adjusted to this kind of life. Long arms, much longer relative to their legs than a human's, useful for reaching branches and swinging between them. A grip strong enough to hang from one hand for long stretches. Feet that could still grasp almost like hands, letting them move through the canopy nearly as easily as along the ground. Their brains grew too, slowly across millions of years, not as large as what would eventually develop in the human line, but large enough to support something important. Memory for where fruit trees grew and when they ripened. Recognition of dozens of individual faces within a group. An awareness of who was friendly with who had helped who could be trusted. This mattered more than it might seem. A chimpanzee's life depends less on brute strength than on its place within a social world. Knowing who your allies are, knowing who to avoid, remembering a favor from 3 years ago. All of this takes a kind of intelligence that has very little to do with tools or fire. It has to do with other minds. Long before scientists ever studied chimpanzees, the people living near their forests already knew them well. Across West and Central Africa, chimpanzees appear again and again in traditional stories passed down through generations. In some communities, they were seen as close relatives of people, deserving a kind of respect rarely given to other animals. Elders in certain regions still tell stories describing chimpanzees as former people who chose to return to the forest. Hunters in these areas often avoided them, not because of any written law, but out of an older, quieter sense that it would be wrong, too close to harming one of their own kind. In some communities, if a chimpanzee was harmed, it was treated with the same small rituals given to a person. A quiet apology spoken into the forest.
This closeness wasn't only spiritual. Families who lived beside chimpanzee territory for generations learned to read their calls almost like a second language. Which sound meant danger nearby, which meant food had been found, which was simply one group letting others know where it was. It would be centuries before any of this made its way into a scientific journal. The knowledge existed all along, carried quietly by people who lived alongside chimpanzees long before anyone called what they were doing research. It wasn't until the 17th century that European travelers began writing about chimpanzees at all, and even then most descriptions were confused. Something with hands like a person's, something that could sit upright and seem to watch you back the way another person would. It took much longer before anyone studied them patiently without trying to capture or classify them from a distance. In 1960, a young woman named Jane Goodall arrived at a forest reserve called Gombe Stream on the eastern shore of Lake Tanganyika in what is now Tanzania. She had no advanced degree at the time. What she had was patience and a willingness to sit quietly in the forest day after day, waiting for the chimpanzees to stop running from her. It took months. The chimpanzees would see her and vanish into the trees. She kept coming back anyway. Slowly, the distance closed. One chimpanzee in particular tolerated her presence more than the others. She gave him a name, David Greybeard, for the patch of pale fur beneath his chin. One afternoon, she watched David Greybeard walk to a termite mound, pick up a thin twig, strip the leaves from it with his fingers, and push it into a tunnel in the mound. He waited a moment, then he pulled it out, covered in termites, and ate them straight off the stick. It was such a small, quiet moment, but at the time, tool use was considered one of the clearest lines separating humans from every other animal. Watching a wild chimpanzee shape a tool with clear intention quietly erased a line people had assumed was permanent. It was such a small, quiet moment, but at the time, tool use was considered one of the clearest lines separating humans from every other animal. Watching a wild chimpanzee shape a tool with clear intention quietly erased a line people had assumed was permanent. Chimpanzees, it turns out, live across a wide stretch of equatorial Africa, from Senegal in the west to Tanzania and Uganda in the east, spread through more than 20 countries in patches of forest and woodland. Not one population, but many, each shaped a little differently by its own patch of land. Some groups, like the ones at Gombe, live along narrow, dense forest strips beside lakes. Others range across much wider stretches of savanna woodland, walking further each day to find enough food. Chimpanzees in different regions have even been found to use different tools for the same task. One population uses stone hammers to crack nuts. Another, only a few hundred kilometers away, has never been seen doing this at all. Researchers now describe this as something close to culture, knowledge passed down group to group, generation to generation, not carried in the genes but taught, watched and copied. Life in the forest was never simple, of course. Across the 20th century, as human populations grew and forests were cleared for farmland and timber, chimpanzee territory shrank piece by piece. Groups that once ranged freely found themselves separated by roads and villages, unable to reach neighboring populations the way their ancestors once had. This part of the story is a quiet kind of difficulty, not one dramatic event, but a slow narrowing of space over many decades that conservationists are still working to understand and address today.
This part of the story is a quiet kind of difficulty, not one dramatic event, but a slow narrowing of space over many decades that conservationists are still working to understand and address today. Today, a chimpanzee's day looks something like this. It wakes at first light, still in the nest it built the night before, high in the branches of a tree. It stretches. It climbs down slowly, branch by branch. It walks along the forest floor, knuckles pressing into the soft earth. It stops at a fruiting tree. It eats. It moves on. Later, it rests in the shade with a few others from its group. Some groom each other, some simply sit, close but not touching, watching the forest around them. A chimpanzee community is usually made up of several dozen individuals, though they rarely travel together as one large group. Instead, they split into smaller parties throughout the day. A few adults here, a mother and her young there, meeting back up, drifting apart again, following wherever the food is.
Adult males usually spend their whole life in the group where they were born. Adult females, when they reach maturity, usually leave to join a different group entirely, walking through unfamiliar forest until they find one that will accept them. Mothers carry their infants everywhere for the first years of life. The infant clings to her fur, riding against her stomach, then later on her back, watching the world go by from the safety of her body. A young chimpanzee stays close to its mother for 4 or 5 years, sometimes longer, learning everything it needs simply by watching what she does. A chimpanzee's hand looks remarkably like a human's. 5 fingers, an opposable thumb, fingernails instead of claws. It can pick up something as small as a single ant or grip a branch strong enough to hold its full body weight while swinging between trees. Grooming, the behavior we started with tonight, takes up a real part of a chimpanzee's day, sometimes several hours. One chimpanzee sits, another works through its fur, strand by strand, removing small parasites, but that isn't really the point. Grooming calms the nervous system, it lowers stress. Chimpanzees who groom each other regularly are far more likely to support one another later, sharing food, standing beside each other, forgiving each other after a disagreement. It isn't only social either. Chimpanzees make and use tools more than almost any other animal besides humans. A stripped twig for fishing termites out of a mound, a chewed leaf folded into a small sponge for soaking up water from a hollow in a tree trunk they can't otherwise reach, a rock chosen for its weight and shape for cracking open a hard-shelled nut against another rock below it. There's something worth sitting with here near the end. Chimpanzees share about 98% of their genetic code with us. Somewhere back along that long, unbroken thread of ancestors, 7 million years deep, our 2 paths were the same path. The hand that grooms a companion's fur for an hour without hurry, the mother carrying her infant against her chest, the young one watching, learning, copying. None of it is so different from things you've done yourself or seen someone you love do. They have been living this way for a very long time, long before cities, long before written language, long before anyone thought to sit quietly in a forest and study them at all. And in scattered patches of forest across a wide stretch of Africa, they are still living this way tonight, resting, grooming, sleeping, quietly, the same as always. Do you remember, at the beginning, we wondered why chimpanzees spend so much time grooming each other, slow, unhurried, an hour or more at a time? Now you know a little more of the answer. It calms them, it binds them together. It has been part of their lives for longer than there have been humans around to watch and wonder about it. Somewhere in a forest tonight, 2 chimpanzees are sitting close together in the dark, one running its fingers slowly through the other's fur, again and again, with nowhere else to be. That's where we'll leave them tonight. Thank you for listening. Sleep well.